Well, so far this election year has been like a wild ride on a roller coaster with redesigned maps and changing primary calendars. There's been a lot to keep up with, and that's why my Montgomery community media thought you just might need Election 2022 Explained. I'm Chris Gordon, honored to be asked to be host here in the MCM studios with an in-depth look at the issues that matter in Maryland's elections this year. And joining me is Valerie Ervin, who I'm delighted to be sitting next to, who has served on the Montgomery County Council and works in the area of public policy. Now, Valerie, how would you begin to sum up this election season so far?
Well, you know, Chris, this is going to be a really exciting election season. It's all about the maps. We have new congressional maps, new state legislative maps, and new maps in Montgomery County. And we'll be talking a lot about that later. But we also have a big gubernatorial race this year, and 5 of our very own from Montgomery County are running for governor. So we are going to be watching that very carefully.
Well, Valerie and I will be reviewing the new dates and deadlines and county districts for casting your ballot this year.
The big headline for this election is the 2 additional councilmanic districts, an East County district where there is a plurality of African American voters, and a 2nd district with a plurality of Latino voters. And now we also have 2 up-county districts.
So later in the show, we'll talk with some insiders about the impact of term limits on the council races and the challengers that incumbent County Executive Marc Elrich faces in his bid to stay in office.
And we'll talk about the state political scene as well and what it means for voters in Montgomery County.
But first, let's get down to the nuts and bolts of this election, like when to vote, where to vote, and most importantly, how to vote. We welcome the Montgomery County Board of Elections Community Engagement and Public Relations Officer, Dr. Gilberto Zelaya. Now, you've worked with the Board of Elections some 19 years. Have you ever seen anything like the start to this year?
Well, of course. I mean, keep in mind, after every census and every redistricting of the maps, of course, there's a lot of energy around it. But also, we've held elections through the DC sniper, Hurricane Sandy, and of course, who will forget 2020 with the pandemic. So we're up to the task. It's our job to serve. And, you know, this is a great opportunity to kind of entice and encourage our voters to do their part to do a vote plan.
I am so thrilled to be here with you, Gilberto. And I have a question that I want to start off with. I know you have a great social media presence, and I want you to talk about this term that a lot of people hear about, and it's called the franchise. Can you explain what that is?
So the franchise encompasses everything that has to do with the electoral process from A to Z. It's about access and transparency, but also accountability, not just for myself as an election administrator, but also for the ones watching today, our voters. It's a two-way street. It's a two-way marriage. So we will do everything in our power to ensure that every single vote center, precinct, and or the access to your mail-in ballot is available and afforded to you. But of course, you have to do your part as well.
All right, so let's start with the dates. What dates are important for the voters to know about?
So the first important date is the voter registration deadline. There's a combination of also the party affiliation deadline. Full disclosure, we don't make the rules, we only follow them. So the first thing, Maryland has closed primaries. Some people may like it, some people don't. It's not my job to ascertain that. It's just to tell you that the voter registration deadline is Tuesday, June 28th, and also the party affiliation deadline. Because we do not want you to be surprised when you show up to vote in person or when you vote by mail and you see this ballot. This is only unaffiliated. About 1/4 of county voters are unaffiliated. And let's say there's a candidate you want to vote for, whether Republican or Democrat, you must be of that party. Once again, we don't make the rules, we follow them. So please update your voter registration if need be. Make sure your residential address is up to date because we will mail what is called a sample ballot several weeks before Election Day so you could formulate your vote plan. If we don't have your updated residential address, you're not going to get anything. And here's an urban myth. The post office will not forward our sample ballot to the new address. You will get your lovely phone bills and coupons to Trader Joe's, etc. You will not get the sample ballot to your new residential address. All you need to do is text the word check to 77788 and you can update that information ASAP.
So can you tell us what the Board of Elections is doing to ensure turnout since we've had 2 failed dates for the primary? So now We're into July, so what can we be looking for?
So what we need to do really is individuals have to formulate their plans. We are right now lining our precincts for Election Day. We're lining up our 14 early voting centers because they've been expanded from 11 to 14. And also we're looking at all the different ballot styles. We have over 740 ballot styles. So depending where you live is the type of ballot style you will get, and also according to your party affiliation.
You just mentioned early voting, so let's talk about the dates for that.
So early voting. So the early voting timetable will be from Thursday, the 7th of July through Thursday, the 14th of July. We have 14 early voting centers, and they will be open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. So if you're like to vote in person, you have 8 consecutive days for several hours at 14 locations. That information is easy. Once early voting comes, all you need to do is text the letters E and V for early voting and your zip code, and it will give you the 3 closest early voting centers, drive-in directions, and wait times.
And of course, the primary is July 19th.
And then July, the last opportunity for you to exercise your your right to vote would be the 19th of July from 7 to 8 p.m. You need to go to your particular precinct. It's on your sample ballot. But if you can't make it to your precinct for whatever reason, then you will need to vote a provisional ballot.
And are you expecting more mail-in ballots this year?
Yes, actually, so far we received about 75,000 mail-in ballot requests, and what's interesting, about 3/4 of those have been permanent. So individuals want to stay on that permanent list, which means that they will continuously get the mail-in ballot for every consecutive election.
You encourage mail-in ballots, and you encourage using the drop boxes. Other states have questioned the reliability of count based on drop boxes and mail-in, but you're confident. Why?
So for 2020, we literally ran a small post office, when you think about that. And there was a lot of concerns with the United States Postal Service. Nonetheless, they're both viable systems. Our drop boxes, we will have 53 drop boxes strategically placed around Montgomery County. For the closest drop box, as the ballots are live and are available, all you need to do is text the word box and your zip code, and it will give you the 3 closest ballot drop boxes and a post office locator.
So how are we getting more younger voters involved?
Yeah, so I started the Future Vote program in 2004 when I was hired, and we're the only county in America that encompasses and brings in students grades 6 through 12 to work as election day aides. Once those students become of age, we encourage them to serve as poll workers once they're 16. But of course, you have to be registered to vote and meet the state requirements. On average, we will recruit about 1,500 students per election cycle. And since 2004, we've worked with over 45 students.
And you need
1,000 students.
And you need adults as well.
Yes, we need adults. There's an urgent call for poll workers. We need them because without the poll workers, we can't implement this party called Election Day or early voting. You need to be a U.S. citizen, registered to vote in Maryland. We will train you. There's an online quiz, there's a virtual portion of the training, and there's a hands-on training that you must do before we could assign you a precinct. You can earn up to $210 or up to 25 student service learning credits, which high school students need to graduate.
So poll workers and judges,
Yes.
Judges.
It's a question about, because of the delays, when are we going to expect the outcome?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. So, you have the candidates that will call a race, but we're still working counting. We still have canvases. We still have to research the provisional ballots that get submitted on election day or during early voting. We will have the early voting results that we will present once every single polling place in the state of Maryland has closed, not just Montgomery County, because there's a gubernatorial race, and we don't want to release any results if there's still precincts open in Prince George's or Anne Arundel County. So once all precincts are closed, we will present the early voting outcomes, and we will continue to present each precinct as they come into the office. We will release those. But depending how many people vote by mail or how many provisional ballots, we won't have the final outcome a couple of weeks after Election Day.
And occasionally there are some precincts around the state that have a problem, have a delay, and you're saying that no results will be published in Montgomery County even if the polls here close.
Exactly. So it could be this one small county in Kent County for whatever reason. Until that precinct closes, we cannot release any results. So this is full disclosure to our candidates. I know they're excited and wanting to have the latest and greatest results at 8:01. It's not going to be realistic. Give us the opportunity to do our part, and we will furnish those information once they're available.
If there's a final question, I'm going to defer to you.
My final question has to do with the new councilmanic districts. So we have new two new districts. What are you all doing to engage those voters in those two new districts?
So soon we're going to mail every single registered voter kind of an update form about their voter registration. We'll also have the sample ballot that gets mailed several weeks before. We're doing a lot of extensive outreach. We have the social media presence. You know, we do the traditional meet and greet out in the community. Now with COVID kind of a little bit more relaxed, we're going to community events. So this is an invitation to any organization, HOA, nonprofit. If you want me to do a little spiel, a little virtual from nuts to bolts, A to Z, just email me and we'll make it happen.
That's great. One of the things, I've covered Montgomery County politics for years. I've covered this young lady when she served at council and when you ran for governor, I might add. Having said that, Montgomery County is facing a historic change in that, and we've touched on this, but I want to expand on it. We now are going from 9 to 11 districts. 11 council members, 4 are at large, so they're not really district, but we have 11 council members. How does that change? You mentioned that you have over 700 ballots that you have to prepare and then count.
Yeah. I think everything encompasses that our voters need to make sure that their voter registration is up to date and current, because everything is based on that. We base the allocation of equipment, the allocation of judges, the locations that we select. If we know that there's 3,000 to 4,000 voters, we prefer to pick a high school or a middle school, not an elementary school, because of parking, because of lighting. This is what we do. So the more that the voters do their part to ensure that their information is current, the better off we could prepare for our voters. Regarding the expansion of the council, it is what it is. We're here to serve. So whether it shrinks, it grows, we expand early voting, we add extra day, like I mentioned earlier today, whether it's the pandemic, whether it's the sniper, whether it's Hurricane Sandy, we're here to serve, but we ask our voters to do their part so we could do our part.
In 2020, was there any challenge to mail-in balloting or drop box usage in Montgomery County?
There was a lot of concern nationally, and I think I told one of our colleagues that my flock is the 675,000 voters. What happens in Texas and other states, it's not that I don't care, but right now I don't, because I need to serve our voters. So there's always a lot of concerns. It's a legitimate system. It's been occurring since the Civil War.
Since the Civil War?
Since the Civil War. It's nothing new, but if you don't like voting by mail, that's okay. Then vote in person. You have 8 consecutive days of early voting, and you have election day. Just make a vote plan, and we're here to serve. At the end of the day, whatever you want, we are here to serve.
Can I ask another question as it relates to what we started with, which was talking about the franchise and how important it is in this country to maintain our democracy? It's all about access. And I wanted to finish my line of questioning here with what now? So what are you asking voters to do?
So the emphasis is to ensure that they're registered to vote, that their voter registration is up to date, and that you formulate a vote plan, whether you want to vote by mail, during early voting, or on election day. And lastly, I would encourage everyone at least once to serve as a poll worker. I'm only one individual. We're part of a small team. We're a small agency. But please, the only way we could kind of hand and strengthen democracy, the opportunity to flourish, if we have poll workers.
If all these opportunities, if a voter still fails to get to the polls, to mail in a ballot, to drop, or to, what is the provisional balloting?
So we have 2 systems. Provisional balloting affords the individual the opportunity to vote. We will not turn anyone away. So we do not care if you're in the wrong precinct on election day, or maybe we can't find you in the poll book. And even so, if you're truly not registered, we have same-day voter registration, which is another aspect of the franchise that strengthens the opportunity for voters to vote. Make sure you bring an ID, a bank statement, a governmental document with your name and your current Montgomery County address. It's called same-day voter registration, which is available during early voting and on election day.
Okay, well, this doesn't all end primary day, primary night. It goes on, the counting.
Yes, it will continue. We have our canvas of our overseas military vote by mail ballots. We have our domestic vote by mail ballots. And in that time, we're also researching any provisional ballots that were submitted. Maybe there was a clerical error, or the voter was in a wrong precinct. And we will afford the voter every single opportunity for us to cast that ballot. Or maybe a voter did not sign their oath when they submitted their vote by mail. So we will cure it. We will call them and have them come to the office, or we'll meet them halfway. We will do everything in our power to ensure that your vote is cast. But once again, you have to do your part. You have to do your part.
You know, District 6 and 7, these are new districts in the terms of Montgomery County Council. So is there an outreach for those?
Yes.
Those
Yes,
districts?
so we're doing outreach once again. If you're within those two councilmatic districts and you would like to have a Zoom session or in-person session, you want to do a voter registrar training, whatever you need, just call our office. They'll transfer you. If you forget my name, just ask for Dr. Z and we'll set it up and we'll make it happen. The sooner the better, because if you want something on the 18th of July, I'm going to say no because we're serving our voters the day before.
Yeah. You know, you have such a great personality. We all call you Dr. Z only because that's we have a connection. We've interviewed you over many elections. And you and your office, the Board of Elections, so professional and unflappable. How do you pull that off?
You know, we love what we do. It's a calling. You know, there's a calling. You know, when you grow up, you don't think about being an election administrator. Usually you want to be a doctor, a lawyer, a police officer, but it's something that it's innate to you. And I enjoy it. Everyone at the office enjoys it. But at the end of the day, it's a marriage. I need our voters to do their part, and we will serve happily.
Yeah, and in some other states, that is not the case.
In other countries, we talked about this earlier, we have people in our county who are from all over the world who are so excited to be in the U.S. where they have access to voting.
Yes, and that's why it's interesting and important that we afford every opportunity to educate our newly naturalized citizens, but they come from different systems from their country of origin. But we are here to serve, and I welcome everyone the opportunity to have that discourse.
Thank you, Dr. Zelaya. Thank you for joining us. And for more information about voter registration, voting early, stay tuned during the upcoming break, and we'll give you all that information and more. And we'll be right back with more information about the historic changes in the upcoming county election and why this may be one of the most important in decades.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
Don't go away. When we return, we'll zoom in on key candidates and races and the changing landscape of Montgomery County politics.
Welcome back to Election 2022 Explained. It's time to take a closer look at Montgomery County and the candidates. With us for this discussion are Nancy Floreen, president at Rebuilding Together Montgomery County, and another alumnus of the Montgomery County Council, and Anne Tallent, executive director of Bethesda magazine.
Now, as legendary singer Sam Cooke once wrote, change is gonna come, and it seems like the county will have more than its share post-election.
We learned from the census that Maryland is the fourth most diverse state on the East Coast, and here in Montgomery County, our 2 new council seats reflect the changing demographics. But when you look at the candidates, there's not a lot of diversity there.
Well, let's start with the race for county executive. There are no women running this year, and next to me, Nancy Floreen, smiling, was a candidate, independent candidate, for that job 4 years ago. So why did you decide not to run, and no other woman wanted to step up, it appears, to this leadership position in Montgomery County?
I was done. It really was. I'd been in office for a good long time. And in the last go-round, I was encouraged to take that chance. It was a wild card, to be sure. And what I learned is that people are not going to switch their party affiliation when they're voting in the general election. So that was a good lesson.
Yeah, even though about 20% of Montgomery County is independent or non-affiliated, 20% Republican, 60% Democratic. But why didn't you then run in the primary this year? I'm not going to give up on this.
I know you're not. Like I said, I was done. I've listened to the arguments for many, many years, and I was ready to hang it up. I am sorry there aren't any women in this race. That's a fact. And I'm not sure who's backstage thinking about this for another run. But the thing is, usually it's when there's an opportunity. Where there's a vacancy, there really is an opportunity. This time around, we have an incumbent who's running again, and that changes the math.
Anne Tallent, from the point of view of executive editor of Bethesda magazine, what do you make of that? No women running for top leadership.
When I started covering this locality in Montgomery County, I was really surprised coming from Baltimore City and having awareness of what was happening at the State House, where the Speaker of the House is a woman of color. I was really surprised that the demographics of the county are not really representative in the executive race. In fact, you already established on the Democratic side, all the candidates are all middle-aged white men. On the Republican side, there are no women there either, but that's where the lone person of color in that race is running, Reardon Sullivan. So it's been a real shift to kind of understand the situation here, and that this pipeline kind of taps out.
Well, I spent a lot of time looking at the census. This past year, I served on the Redistricting Commission, and one of the things that we found out throughout that work was the enormous demographic change in this county. In fact, it might surprise some people to know that only one district in Montgomery County is majority white. And you might think of that as Senate District 16, which encompasses Bethesda and Chevy Chase. How do you each think this will affect the election this year?
Well, I don't know what the Redistricting Commission thought in terms of the voters. Will we see the same demographic changes in the voting population, which is different from the population? As you know, I don't know what the standard percentage of turnout is in a primary. It's pretty low, 40% maybe of voters. So that's 40% of registered voters, and registered voters are a smaller percentage of the overall population. So will the variety of are the candidates exciting enough to get out different portions of the community to the voting booth this year? Remains to be seen.
Let me ask you that question. Are the candidates exciting enough?
That's a great question. From the engagement that we're seeing, we're not necessarily seeing a lot of traction in terms of audience engagement or citizen engagement with this election. There's still time. There's 3 months, but I think it's only now that people are kind of starting to recognize that, hey, there's a race going on. The polling that I'm aware of it seems to indicate that no one, certainly on the executive race, has kind of dislodged the power of the incumbency, and we're seeing continuing support for Mark Elridge.
And remember also, COVID has thrown a real wrench into political appearances and community events and opportunities to show up. If you've gone to a meeting in the past couple of years, chances are it's been online, right? It's not the same. So you haven't had the same kind of meet and greet opportunities for candidates that we've had in past years. I think that's actually going to hurt incumbents as well, particularly on the county council. Most of them are new. Already, their hardest race you run is not necessarily the first race, it's the second one. You have to still battle to keep your seat if you're an incumbent. Now, Mark is in another category in that regard. Yeah. But I think COVID has affected any candidate, any public official's ability to connect with the public.
Let's talk about all the candidates. And you mentioned that there are Republican candidates. Of course, in this county, one would think that as far as the Democratic primary, that's going to determine possibly determine the winner. Some of these candidates, and I hope I'm not telling tales out of school, have contacted you directly. And I know
Yes.
Tom Hucker did.
Yes.
Who was running and now is running for council, but he was running for county executive until he called you.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting situation. So I do get a lot of phone calls from some former colleagues and just people in the community who want my input on their runs for whatever election might be coming up. And this sort of like has me digging down into the first question, which is, because of the huge demographic shifts in the county, how is that going to change how elections even happen? So for Tom Hucker, for example, he was running for county executive, and there was data that showed that he was not running very well. So he had to make a quick decision before April 15th to switch. I'm not sure that helped him much, to switch from running for county council to running for at-large county council member. The demographic profile of this community has changed to the point where his constituency base is not the same base that he will be talking to in different parts of this 500 square mile county that we call home, which has changed dramatically. So I think that both of you have answered this question very well. But as we look forward to the next 4 years, 8 years, 12 years, the way we used to do politics might have to change pretty dramatically as well.
And how does that affect David Blair, who last election cycle lost by only 77 votes to Marc Elridge, and Hans Riemer, who served, I believe, with both of you on council, who is also a very viable. So you got David Blair, Marc Elridge, Hans Riemer, you've got Republicans, and Peter James, Democrat. You have some unaffiliated. How do we see this shaping up this far out as we enter primary season, July 19th?
I think that right now, from all outside appearances, Marc looks very probable with the power of incumbency. If there were perhaps consolidation in terms of either Riemer or Blair dropping out, that calculus could change. It's still a pretty big hill to climb when they're facing the power of incumbency. I don't really see a path for someone like Peter James. I think that he, has some particular positions that he's interested in furthering, but I think it's certainly, really a three-person race, and I think it's probably a little bit static unless one of them drops out.
What do we make of the Sierra Club endorsement?
Interesting.
Good.
Really
I was asked to
interesting.
ask interesting questions. I'm glad I did.
That they have chosen David Blair over Hans in particular is surprising.
Hans being more liberal,
Hans
having the environmental chops?
Yeah, he's been in the weeds on this stuff. I read a piece that said it had to do with, it was believed that it was because Hans has been more supportive of the Beltway expansion issues and the toll road issues, but apparently Blair has too. So it's a distinction without a difference. Maybe a new voice. I mean, I think that's going to be the real issue in this campaign, a new voice or the same old. And that's what this race is going to, county executive race is going to come down to. Can David get that message out? We'll see. In the last race, there were a bunch of council members running. The field is narrower now, and maybe that will make a difference. We'll see.
Can we double down on the power of the incumbency that you brought up? Because I really have a point of view on that, and I want to kind of double down a little bit, because people think that Marc is inevitable. I don't believe that's true. I think that David Blair barely missed winning last time by 70 votes. And I think that if you build the right coalition in this county, you can win. And I think that Marc's solid hold in his mind on his 30% that don't go anywhere, well, that's softened up since the 4 years that he's been in office. So I think that people need to have an opportunity to hear from all of these candidates, and to this whole inevitability about Marc is, I think it's troubling to me as a woman and a person of color who do not necessarily see him leading on the issues that matter in my community. So I'm wondering what the incumbency looks like for the county council seats as well. I would like to throw that question open.
My reaction would simply be that, particularly for Marc, he's been on the ballot a lot of times. And so voters have seen that. And they may or may not have voted for him, but they've seen that name a lot. Same with Hans, less so with David. So the question is, really, what is the message that can be gotten out? And remember, we haven't seen any messages yet. No, it's too early. So we can only assume, based on rumors or from a small group of people, what might be the relative opportunity. As I said before, also going back to the council race, I don't think incumbency is any guarantee of anything. I know when I was on the council, I never felt that I had a guaranteed win with every election. I worked as hard as I could, and I hope those people understand that. It's not a given thing. Just because you won once, that's not enough. And right now, there's not a lot of media that covers local government, local races. There's, thank goodness for Bethesda Beat and this show, because there are very few opportunities for voters to hear what the options are in any detail.
And let me say that MyMCM is going to have a forum for both council candidates and the county executive. But let's expand now to council. There are 4 at-large seats, and there are 4 candidates who have experience in name recognition. So taking Valerie's question, do they have kind of a leg up with that name recognition? And then we'll talk about the other 7 districts where there are more than 30 candidates. We have a real logjam, a lot of people running.
Yes. I mean, and to your point, Valerie, I certainly recognize the option for great strategy or also pre-election surprises. Anything can happen. Not everything is probable, but everything, it's all on the table. In terms of the at-large race, 3 of the incumbents you mentioned are incumbents for at-large. Yeah. So there is some advantage in that. I think the 4th person you referred to was Tom Hucker, who had run, has district incumbency. I don't know if it's still considered incumbency if you're moving from a district to an at-large role. I think the proposition looks a little bit different for him versus like someone like Will Jawando or Evan Glass or Gabe Albornoz.
Well, it's interesting if you look at the endorsements so far, Gabe hasn't gotten any, which is interesting for whatever reason, I don't know. Evan has done pretty well, so has Will, and Tom has switched teams. So, I don't know how endorsing organizations like MCEA or the Sierra Club or anyone is going to think about that when they've already had a lot of their meetings and we're considering one position after as opposed to another. Now, I'm not sure it makes that much difference, but when you're looking at not being known by the community, every little bit helps. So, it's going to be interesting. And then we have a couple women also running for this seat. Can they prevail given the predominance of men in this position and their history? That's a question. I think Tom has an uphill battle. And I will tell you, Valerie, I told Tom to do Tom Hucker to run at large instead of, I said to him,
when did you
county
tell him?
executive before this, long before this, he of course ignored me. But he saw the light, but it's still going to be a hard race for him. Some people have voted for him, and his, from the Tacoma Park Silver Spring wealth of voters district, people who show up and vote for pretty much everything. Some of that base will continue with him, but the rest of the county, as you recognize, is very, very different.
Well, you raised a great point, and I didn't want to lose this on what you said. When Nancy was on the council, she was the hardest working at-large council member I have ever seen, and I mean this because you would campaign like it was your first campaign.
Yeah, always.
And I'm saying this for the viewing public. The folks running have to run like that.
Yes.
And we have had COVID, And so no one's really focusing on this election. We're all involved. We're the people that pay attention, but the majority of our citizens haven't woken up to the fact that there's an election coming and it's in the middle of the summer when they may or may not be around. And so it's going to be interesting, and I'm glad you're here, because without Bethesda Beat, without MCM, like you said, when we lost our local papers, we lost the ability to have access, as Dr. Zelaya was talking about. Democracy is about access. And if we cannot provide access to our citizens, that's a disservice, because they don't know who these people are. We know them.
Right.
And that's one thing that COVID has affected for incumbents. Because as I said earlier, the incumbents haven't been able to go to community meetings because they weren't having any. And for 2 years, that is a whole long time for a person not to be able to connect with their constituency. And I think that's going to make this race all the more difficult for people currently holding these positions.
Can I bring up term limits? I think they have had. Can I bring them up? You'd both still be on council.
Please.
You'd probably both still be serving Montgomery County, hardworking council members, if they didn't have term limits. It created a lot of people from council running 4 years ago for county executive. It's created other people who have moved on to other things, who were very good public servants. Now, and I want to turn to you on this, you helped draw the map for the new districts for council. Mm-hmm. Tell us about what that opens up, opportunities and changes.
It opens a lot of opportunities, and let's start with what you just brought up, and that is term limits. Two big things happened in the last decade: term limits and public financing of campaigns, which has thrown Montgomery County's sort of like bucolic, like political scene into a completely different animal. So now we have people who come from out of nowhere to run for office, and as long as they are able to, raise the kind of money you need for a public match, they're going to run. And so we have people who have not been vetted by anyone. Mm-hmm. And I'm aging myself now, but I remember back in the day when I used to look at the council with great respect and admiration for all of these people who had spent their entire lives working on behalf of others. Mm-hmm. What we're creating now is a different kind of political animal, and we used to make fun of a neighboring county because it had term limits, and look at the mess that was created over there. And so I think when we redid this map, it was because that's what the voters wanted. They wanted to add two new seats to the council. So now we're even stirring that pot up a little bit more, because we need people to pay attention. We need more Bethesda beats. We need more access to information, because we don't know what we're going to leave to our residents unless we do better.
Now that we have District 6 and 7 districts, is there any chance that we're going to have a Republican on the county council?
No.
Don't sugarcoat it.
It's unfortunate, actually.
I would imagine it is from the point of view of democracy.
But we just haven't seen the kind of presence and stick-to-itiveness from Republican candidates that we met. I worked with Mayor Betty Ann Kroenke when I was on Planning Commission. She got elected to the council as a Republican. I worked with Howie Dennis. He was a member of the council when I began. Lovely man.
Mm-hmm. But he was the last Republican elected to the council, and that was two decades ago. Yeah.
That was Howie. That was a long time ago. And frankly, Howie was more liberal than I was on a lot of issues. I mean, Valerie would remember that. But we just don't have those kinds of folks who've been active in public service and created a community base. Which I think is very unfortunate, because the council has gone farther and farther to the left, if you ask me, over the years, which is not reflective of the Montgomery County I know. Now, it may be diverse, we're very different in many ways, but we're not all like Tacoma Park. And I think that is one of the challenges that candidates face now.
Yeah. Do you agree that the Republicans are at a disadvantage? I was told by the husband of a woman running in District 7, no names, that she's moderate and has been asked by Republicans, please change your party affiliation. You may win. We'd love to have a Republican on the council.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I'll stand by the belief that nothing is impossible, but lots of things are improbable. I do think that the redistricting long term provides more opportunity for the party to develop candidates, particularly up county.
And actually, District 7 is not a bad growing ground for that. Also, I think, too, as well, out in Poolesville, in that part of the county, it's very conservative and very different from the rest of Montgomery County.
And 7 is Laytonsville, Damascus.
Oh, and Olney, so it's a range. Yeah.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there.
That was a lively conversation. Thanks to Nancy Floreen of Rebuilding Together Montgomery County and Anne Tallent from Bethesda Magazine for their informed observations.
As the largest and richest county in the state of Maryland, it seems like Montgomery County should have plenty of influence in Annapolis, in the state capital. But it hasn't seemed like it in the past 8 years under Republican Governor Larry Hogan.
To talk about how we might wield more power in the years ahead, Nancy Floreen, president of Rebuilding Together Montgomery County, makes an encore appearance for more of Election 2022 Explained.
And Marc Uncapher, who is the president of the Montgomery County Republican Central Committee, will add his thoughts and insights on the candidates and the county. Well, after all the dust from the census settled, there was a lot of squabbling over state maps and congressional districts this year. But at the end of the day, who are the winners and who are the losers? So I'm going to turn to you and say, District 6, Representative David Trone, is running in a district that 10 years ago was reliably Republican with Roscoe Bartlett. And then John Delaney ran, and then David Trone. And now, as a result of congressional districting, would you say that District 6 is in play for Republicans?
Well, it was actually in play after Roscoe Bartlett, too. It was a very competitive first go-round, but it has, after that first 2014 election, has been reliably more Democratic. However, it is now switched from, 538, one of the sites that rates these things, to a R+1, which means that if the election sort of follows normal trend, the Republican has essentially a 1-point advantage. If you think of redistricting a little like a balloon and you kind of mush things around one way or another way, basically the Raskin District 8 seat has become far more Democratic than it was before and has created an opening for a Republican candidate in District 6.
So let me just turn to Nancy Floreen. So did this boomerang on the Democrats? They wanted to make District 1, the Republican Andy Harris's district, put that into play, but instead the Democrat David Trone's. We have 8 congressional districts, all but one Democratic. One is Andy Harris. So did the Democrats hurt themselves when they came up with their redistricting map that was vetoed. They overrode the veto, and then it became a court case, and then the judge overturned it, and then there was compromise, and now there's this.
Well, I think we're back to a pretty rational set of congressional districts. I think the last time we had districts like as thoughtful as this, I think might have been in the 70s. You know, Maryland made the books for its gerrymandering. We were famous. I don't think people realize how bad Maryland has done compared to other states. I mean, we were up there. There are others in competition, but we were really bad. So personally, I am glad that we're not siphoning off so many Montgomery County Democratic votes to other people. At least I get to still vote for Jamie. I wasn't going to be able to do that with the previous map. And you know, we had John Sarbanes. You know, the spy. It was everywhere. We had a little bit of that. It must have been exhausting going.
That was a district where you literally could not drive from one end to another without going in because it was waterways.
I believe they needed a boat.
Yep.
And you know, they got away with it for a good long time. But I think this is a rational solution, and you know, I think they were just sort of begging the court to overturn that. They had to have been.
I'm going to agree 100% with what both of you said, in particular what Nancy just said about this new map. It makes sense. And it seems to me that David Trone would probably not be too disappointed in it because it seems like those constituents are better aligned to him than they were to Jamie Raskin, in my opinion. So I really appreciate the map, although I was at one point in Congressional District 4 in Silver Spring when former Congresswoman Donna Edwards was a very good friend of mine, was my Congresswoman, and that her district got thrown way deeper into Southern Maryland. And I think if there were winners and losers, I don't particularly think that that helped her so much, but it didn't help Heather Mazur, who was running in a deeply Republican area against Andy Harris.
Yeah, she was, I think, counting on the map that would have taken the Eastern Shore and gone into Annapolis across the bay. It would have made it that much more competitive, and that's obviously not what's happening now.
I mean, you just have to face facts. People on the Eastern Shore are more conservative. It's okay.
Mm-hmm. It's fine.
And Western Maryland.
Yeah. They are,
Tarrant
and
County.
you know, we'll see.
This is who we are.
I think David Trone can deal with this.
I do too.
And if he faces a challenger, he's faced challengers before, he'll be fine. I mean, John Delaney just said nuts to this and went on to private life again. But David seems to enjoy it, so
I think it'll be a competitive race, though. Yeah. I mean, let's remember Jamie Raskin ran a primary against Trone and came out on top. So I think that being able to spend the money that Trone has isn't necessarily the guarantee of being elected.
Well, the map also helps Jamie if he's planning to run for the U.S. Senate seat that might be vacated at some point soon with the departure of Senator Cardin when he decides to retire. But it's a very solid blue base for a very solid blue.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because that 8 used to go up to Carroll County,
yes,
which is about as conservative.
No, it went to Pennsylvania.
It went to Pennsylvania.
Yes.
Yeah, yes, it went included all the way to the Pennsylvania border.
There was a telephone pole, I believe, in Laytonsville that was part of his district, and then it kept going.
Yes,
it was ridiculous.
Pole.
It was about.
I was told by a member of Congressman Raskin's staff how happy they were with the map because they would have to drive up to Carroll County quite regularly, and it just seemed totally out of place. So now they're back in the home districts. So.
And let's acknowledge that gerrymandering happens in a lot of other states, many of them red.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the competitive race. It's interesting because for both parties, increasingly, the only race that matters is the primary. Mm-hmm. And I think that has made the House of Representatives that much more polarized because people are not looking to reach out. So having a district in Maryland, again, this is a map that will be in practice for the next 10 years, having a district in Maryland that matters where you have to compete on both sides will make things, I think, that much more of more centrist in its final.
You know, I think that's a really important point because primaries have have been driven by the edges of the parties. Let's agree. And they haven't been willing to do much compromising, best as I can tell. And I think it's very unfortunate, and I think it's exactly that point. People haven't had to deal with a real general election where you really had issues on the line for people to discuss.
This has been called a very important, a decisive midterm leading up to 2024, whatever that brings.
Right.
Do you get a sense that there's going to be a shift, and it's going to be a shift to Republican in this midterm?
We've talked about District 6, but it's actually interesting, the Dutch Republicans district and Sarbanes district, they're predominantly Democrat, but I think that the ratings that they have are, I think, D+9, D+11. In a wave election, they could come into play. To use a comparison, in Virginia, Biden won by 10 percentage points. Obviously, it last November swung the other way. So sometimes we kind of overthink this of, well, it's, D+, therefore that's what it's going to be. In fact, they're both within the range if you had a wave election of potentially being competitive.
So I want to go to the next question because I think it sort of dovetails into what you just said. So what do we need to let voters know about the change in these district lines? Because this is kind of substantial for a lot of the voters, especially as far up in Carroll County, but what do voters need to know?
Well, I think it's going to be easier to figure out where your district is. You're thinking about the point up in Montgomery where, you had 3 or 4 districts coming in close proximity. I think that's going to strengthen their ability of kind of knowing exactly who their congressman or congresswoman is, and maybe identify a little bit more closely with the race. I think we're involved in politics, so we know exactly where our district and whatever. For a lot of voters, that was very confusing. I think at the Sarbanes rate, it was probably hard for his constituents to know which congressional district am I actually in.
Well, and I think it's going to be surprising to voters. I think the average voter has no clue about where they are right now. How many people have really clicked onto the interactive map to figure out whether their voting district has changed? I'd be surprised if many have. I'm always surprised at how little people follow election news. This sort of stuff that's really important. It's going to be up to the candidates to reach out and connect with people. They don't have much time to do that in, but they're going to have to gear up and figure out the right databases and make it happen in a very short period of time.
Very short.
You talk about a short period of time. This primary was delayed. What impact might that have on the outcome statewide?
Well, it gives people a little more time to campaign and get the word out that they're there and they're going to work for you, whichever position they're taking. So I think that's the one advantage. It's confusing for more traditionalists, people who spend a lot of money on a campaign so far and have to spread that out a couple more weeks. But the world isn't going to come to an end.
It's interesting. I know you probably talked about this in the earlier segments, but there is a real difference between the general election voter and the much smaller, more targeted primary voter. And I think between now and July, they're going to figure out where they are and do their homework and decide. It's, again, a smaller group than the broader electorate.
I hope that's true because I know this July election date is problematic for a lot of reasons. One, Nancy brought this up earlier, the COVID situation has made the last 2 years very difficult for politicians, especially people who are running in these new districts. I think a lot of people have, like you said, have no idea what's going on. They are not tuned in to it. By the time July rolls around and people have to start scrambling to figure these things out, I just know as a voter myself, someone who pays attention, people are calling me all the time saying, are we still in Donna Edwards' district? Like they don't know.
Yes.
And so I don't know if it's up to each of the respective parties to figure this out and put some money into it and make sure that there's a really good pitch from now until election day so that people actually know where they're supposed to be.
Well, it is up to the Board of Elections, I believe, to get that word out. They've already contacted voters about their voting preference, whether they want to do by mail and whether they want the ballot sent to them. So they have done outreach. People are aware that something's coming up. But again, how do you get people to pay attention? That's always the challenge, and it's an expensive challenge.
So let's talk about the governor's race, because that's fascinating. We've had a Republican governor. First of all, just let me ask you, Mark, were you disappointed that Governor Hogan is not running for Senate or anything at this point?
I really was not surprised. I would have been flabbergasted if he decided to do it, so I guess I wasn't.
So it's an open seat. So
Yes.
What do we have shaping up?
Well, we have an interesting crew. We have what I understand is to be a rather credible Republican candidate. Mark can talk about her.
Kelly Schultz is really much running as the sort of heir to the Hogan legacy. She's, I think, has a very strong personal story. Went to college very late in late-ish in her career, and really, has evolved since then. Was served in 2 senior positions in the Hogan cabinet. Was a delegate from Frederick County, and very strong on the stump. And so I think she'll be a very effective heir to that Hogan legacy.
And then the Democrats are doing their usual thing, where they eat what they kill, kind of eating their young, really. Where we have a lot of great people campaigning for, one position. We'll see how it goes. Peter's been running for this job, I think, since he was 12, and certainly was working at it as comptroller.
Right.
We have most of Montgomery County is running for this job.
Most of Montgomery County is running, or for lieutenant governor.
Yeah, one or the other. Yeah, right. We're fertile ground.
So you're saying that Baltimore is ultimately going to decide this?
No, there's not enough people there.
We're not good at electing a favorite son, such as it is, or woman.
Well, I would.
From Montgomery, Valerie has been deep into that game. She can speak to that.
I just want to back up everything Mark said about Kelly Schultz. Personally, I think she is a very strong candidate. I know her life story. I relate very well to her. It's time for a woman in the State House, and I think whoever comes out of this morass of candidates on the Democratic side is going to be up against a very formidable candidate.
Well, you mentioned Peter Franchot. Let's mention them all.
Do we have time?
Yeah, well, no. We're going to make time quickly.
Well, there's Tom Perez. Valerie succeeded him. And it's funny to me, he talks so much about his time on the Montgomery County Council.
Wes Moore,
I don't know him. He seems to be getting a lot of support.
Rashawn Baker.
Rashawn Baker.
We
know him out of Prince George's County.
A
executive.
sweet man.
Yeah.
A sweet man, and running with our Nancy Navarro.
Our former colleague. Yeah.
And let's see, who else do we have? We have
John King.
John King, right?
Ashwani Jain.
There you go.
Oh, Doug Gansler.
Doug Gansler, right. He's been in the game for some time. He's been around. I don't see much traction from his campaign, but we'll see. Anything could happen. It's going to be exciting.
Anything can happen July 19th.
Well, and that's just the beginning. Then the real campaign begins.
There you go. Thanks to our guests, Nancy Floreen and Marc Uncapher. It's going to be a fascinating political season here in Maryland.
Thanks for joining us. We hope we fulfill the promise of Election 2022 Explained. And stay tuned. There will be more political programming from MCM Studios right up to the election day in November.
So keep an eye on MyMCM for county executive and county council forums coming up to you before early voting in the July primary. Thanks for watching.